I'm stuck in a bubble. I'm stuck in a bubble on Twitter, X, I guess, where I see some very specific content. And that's either some borderline creepy or boring or weird stuff Elon thinks I should be seeing to stay on the platform and get more engaged, I guess. Or, and that is what I want to talk about today, I see a lot of JavaScript related stuff, a lot of JavaScript related tweets or posts, how they're called nowadays, I guess. And with that, I mean the entire JavaScript ecosystem. I see frontend related posts, lots of opinions and things related to React and so on, but also, of course, some backend related stuff, posts related to Dino or Bun and Node.js, of course, and also posts that refer to libraries or packages and solutions or patterns that are popular in the JavaScript community, you could say. Things like Tailwind, for example, or other related topics. That's the content I mostly see on Twitter and X, which of course makes sense because that's the content I'm creating on my own as well. That's what I'm interested in. So that is fine. I'm not complaining about seeing that content. That's not my point here. But this bubble has a problem. And maybe other bubbles, the PHP bubble, if you're in there, maybe those bubbles have a similar problem. I can't tell with certainty, but whenever I see some posts from the PHP world, at least to me, they don't seem like the posts I see in the JavaScript world. And with that, I mean that in this JavaScript bubble, I see a lot of strong opinions, to put it like this, that you must use a certain pattern, that you must not do something in a certain other way, that you must use the Next.js app router and not the Pages router, that you must use Tailwind and not Bootstrap CSS because that's outdated and old, and so on. And to some extent, those posts, of course, make sense. There are certain patterns you should consider following. It might make more sense to use a more recent version of a package or a more recent way of using a certain package, like with the Next.js app router, than following an older approach or using an older version. That generally makes, of course, sense. But what often gets overlooked and what can be problematic and intimidating for less experienced developers is, of course, that ultimately our job as developers, as web developers, is to build applications, build websites that are great for our customers, for our visitors. They don't care about which technology you're using under the hood. And if you're overcomplicating things because you're trying to combine many popular packages to build the ultimate best possible web application, and along the way you're introducing a lot of bugs and you're running into a lot of issues because all those shiny new packages and versions might still have some bugs themselves, if that's what's happening, you're not doing your job right. You're not building the best possible product for your customers. And it can also be problematic for people who are getting into web development when they read all those strong opinions and when they get the feeling that there are only a few right but a lot of wrong choices. Because imagine you're starting off your journey into web development and you took some bootcamp course, or you're learning everything on your own by piecing together different sources. At some point, you might stumble across Bootstrap CSS because it's still getting recommended by a lot of guides and tutorials, I guess. Or you might even stumble across jQuery because at some point you read some article that mentions it or anything like that. And you start learning Bootstrap or jQuery until someone tells you how wrong that is and that you must not do that, that it's outdated, that no one uses this, and that you instead should learn Tailwind instead of Bootstrap, and React or Vue or Angular instead of jQuery. Or maybe even that's wrong and there's a more extreme opinion which tells you that even React is not a good choice. You should be learning Svelte and Solid.js. Do you see my point here? It's easy to get pushed off your path where you wanted to learn web development and get a lot of strong opinions on what you're doing wrong and what you should be doing instead. And therefore, you don't know at all what you should be doing. And it's intimidating. And maybe you stop your pursuit of becoming a web developer, which would be a shame because it's an amazing job. Still, despite AI, I created a separate video and talk about that. So it's an amazing career, but of course not if you get pushed out of it at the very beginning because of all those strong opinions and because of that bubble. And just for the record, because some developers, especially in that bubble, might forget about it, but just to make it clear, the web is mostly not powered by React or by Tailwind or something like this, also not by NodeJS. Instead, over 70% of all websites that exist out there use PHP on the server side. Or, for example, also over 70% of all websites still use jQuery. Around 20% of websites use Bootstrap CSS. Around 40% of the entire web is powered by WordPress alone, which uses PHP, for example, which therefore alone makes up for a significant part of those 70%. So what I'm saying here is that all these discussions we're having about which library and package you should be using to style your site or to connect to a database or whatever, all these discussions are discussions we're having for a minority of all the websites out there in the web. The majority is not using either of those shiny, fancy packages or frameworks. Now, of course, I know that we can't look at the share of websites alone because that does not translate to web traffic. Of course, those numbers I just mentioned will very likely not be the right numbers if we would look at web traffic, because of course there are many websites out there, but there is only a part of those websites, a small part arguably in the end, that gets most of the traffic. I mean, Facebook and YouTube alone get lots of traffic, are responsible for a significant portion of the overall internet traffic, and those websites are not using jQuery, to my knowledge. Though, for example, Facebook was built with PHP, and as far as I know, they're still using that. So we don't even have Node.js there. Instead, it's part of those over 70% of websites that are using PHP. Still, what I'm saying is, of course, that it's likely that many of those websites that get a lot of traffic are using newer technologies. Though I'm saying likely, not guaranteed. Indeed, there are thousands of websites out there that are using jQuery, Bootstrap, whatever, that are generating millions of dollars of revenue for their creators or owners. And therefore, those people who created and own those websites did everything right. They did everything right because they did not lose track of that main goal every web developer should have, which is to build a great product for their customers, for the website visitors, for the people with the money in the end. A great website or web application is not great because it was built with React or Angular or Tailwind or Prisma or anything like that. It's not great because it uses one of those packages, but instead because it delivers real high value to its visitors, to the customers who are using this website or web service. And that's something every web developer should keep in mind. Now, of course, we have all these newer technologies, all these modern frameworks and packages that solve specific niche problems because there are problems to be solved. And because those different packages and frameworks and versions we have there, because those things give us tools that ideally allow us to build better websites and better web apps that are faster, have less bugs, and deliver a better user experience. So, of course, ultimately, it very likely makes sense to use a modern technology and to learn modern frameworks and libraries when working as a web developer. I'm not saying that we should all go back to using jQuery, for example. I'm just saying that it's valid to use that, and that especially if you're learning web development, you should not get intimidated by all these strong opinions you'll be reading and you'll see along the way. It, of course, makes sense to be open to new technologies and to ultimately learn some of them, but you don't have to learn them all, and you should keep in mind that it's less black and white than some people might make you think. That's really important because ultimately that is what will help you stay a web developer and stay in that area without getting pushed out of it and getting intimidated. Because there simply are too many things you could learn and too many things people will tell you you have to learn or you have to do in a certain way. And hence, it's important to set a goal and then focus on that and then go there with an open mind, but don't try to just chase the shiny stuff and just use the latest versions of all the frameworks and the most recent framework that was released. That will likely not get you anywhere.